I couldn't tell if it really was easier to float. A big wave came and hit my face sideways just as I was turning my head to breathe. I stood up, coughing. The water didn't taste like the salt water that I gargled with when I had a cold. Instead, it had a strong, bitter taste that stung my nostrils and my throat. My eyes burned. "Try floating on your back," my mother suggested, flopping back and closing her eyes. "It's easy." She was right. In the pool, I could float on my stomach, but never on my back. But in the sea, my legs and head didn't start sinking while my chest and stomach stayed afloat. All of me was floating. I could almost take a nap. Once we got tired of floating, my mother and I started jumping the waves. Side by side, holding hands, we treaded water, each paddling with one arm instead of two, waiting for the next big wave to come surging our way. If we stopped moving at just the right time, we could crest over the top and glide down to the other side, falling slowly down the gentle slope till another wave came and lifted us up. All around us, other grown-ups and kids were doing the same thing. There were so many waves coming and going. Sometimes we couldn't see people who were only a few feet away until a wave lifted us up and dropped us almost on top of them. Laughing, we would apologize before another wave swept us away. I don't know how long we were riding the waves before I noticed that my mother and I hadn't seen anyone for a long time. I thought of another thing, too. When we first started, my feet had brushed against the sand bottom almost every time we came down. In the lull between the waves, I'd be standing in the water only up to my chest. That hadn't happened for a while. My feet hadn't touched bottom for at least 20 waves now. I stretched my body as straight as I could, trying to touch bottom with my toes. Nothing. Just as I opened my mouth to point that out to my mother, a big wave came, my head went under, and my hand was swept loose from hers. When I came up again, I was turned around, facing the shore for the first time. I couldn't believe what I saw. The people on the beach looked so small that I couldn't tell our family from anyone else's. Before I really understood what this meant, another wave rose. My head went under again, and I came up coughing and spitting. My mother, to my relief, was right beside me, treading water. "Mom," I tried to warn her, but the look on her face told me that she already knew. Her eyes were wide open, and there was a big frown between her eyebrows. "Turn around and swim," she said. "It's not as far as you think." "I can't," I gasped, before a wave pounded me, filling my mouth with a burning, bitter taste. My mother was beside me again, treading water. She couldn't reach out and hold my hand now, I realized suddenly, because even she needed both of her arms to stay afloat. The water was moving underneath, pulling us sideways. The beach looked farther and farther away. It was all I could do to keep my head from going under. My mother started flinging her hand upward, trying to wave it from side to side. She was calling for help. That meant we were drowning. Before the next wave hit us, I kicked my legs as hard as I could and lunged toward my mother, making up the short distance between us. The wave hit. We came up, both of us coughing and spitting, my arms clutched tightly around her neck. "Listen," my mother said in a choked-up voice. "You have to let go." "But I'll drown," I wailed. She stopped moving her arms just for a moment, long enough to put them around me and draw me closer. I could feel my shoulders, wet and slippery, pressed against her collarbone. "Let go," she said in a voice that sounded surprisingly calm. "Now, or we'll both drown." By the time the next wave went over my head, I was swimming alone, flailing my arms and legs to come up for air, and my mother was beside me. If it weren't for me, I thought, she could easily swim back to the shore. She was a strong swimmer. We were drowning because of me. "Stay calm," she said, "and float." We treaded water for a while, and between the waves my mother looked around, no doubt trying to measure the distance we had to swim. "Look over there," she said, turning away from the shore and pointing toward the piece of land jutting into the sea. "We can't swim back to the beach, but we can make it to those rocks." The waves had been pushing us sideways toward the rocks as well as farther from the shore. From where we were now, the tip of that land was about as far away as I could swim in the river without stopping if the current was with me. That piece of land was our last chance. If I couldn't make it there, I would surely drown. Heading toward the rocks meant turning away from the beach completely, swimming farther out to sea. If I drifted too far to the side and missed the tip of the land, there wouldn't be anywhere else. Every time I came up for air, I'd better be looking at those rocks, making sure they were still in my sight. The only stroke that would allow me to do that was the breaststroke. I took a big breath and started kicking my legs with my knees bent, flicking my ankles the way my mother had taught me in the river. The arms, I told myself, should draw nice big arcs, not a bunch of little frantic circles that would make me tired. My mother swam right beside me in her easy, graceful breaststroke. She was between me and the rest of the sea, guiding me toward the rocks, showing me how I should swim. The waves we had been fighting were suddenly helping us. In just a few minutes, my mother and I stood on the rocky ground of that slip of land, looking back toward the shore. My legs felt wobbly, and I was breathing hard. The two of us looked at each other, too stunned to say anything. For a while we just stood, trying to catch our breath, listening to the waves as they continued to crash at our feet. Then we started walking. The rocks formed a steep cliff above us, but at the bottom there was enough room for us to walk side by side. Cautiously, we picked our way back to the beach, trying not to cut our feet or slip back into the sea. On the way, we noticed a group of people gathered on the sand watching us. When we got there, they came rushing toward us. They were my uncles and several other men we had never seen. "I waved for help," my mother said to them. "We thought you were just waving for fun," one of my uncles said. "We didn't know anything was wrong until we saw you walking on those rocks." One of the strangers, an old man in a shirt and trousers, shook his head. "You got caught in a riptide," he said. "A fisherman drowned there a few years ago." Several people were talking all at once, saying how lucky we were, but I wasn't listening very carefully. My brother was running toward us. Behind him, the beach was more crowded than when we had first started swimming. For the first time, I noticed an ice cream stand not too far away. "Mom," I said, "my throat hurts from the seawater. I would love some ice cream." When my mother told people the story of our near drowning, that was the detail she always emphasized, how I had calmly asked for ice cream as soon as we were back on the beach. Every time we remembered this incident, she said to me, "You are a brave girl. You let go of me when you had to." The way she talked about it, our experience in the Sea of Japan was a great adventure that proved my courage. If I could swim well enough not to drown in a place where a fisherman had died in a riptide, then I never again had to worry about drowning. I did not question her logic, though years later I realized that my mother had said just the right things to prevent me from becoming afraid. If she had told stories of a near disaster, a close call, instead of the story about my courage, I might never have been able to swim again. Instead, I believed that I had conquered that sea for good. All I had to do was be more careful and watch out for the riptide. My mother and I swam at the same beach again the same afternoon, and the 2 following days. We returned to my grandparents' house and continued our swimming lessons. I was getting so good, she said, that the following year she would teach me to butterfly.